Have you got another project that you want to tell about? That
There's not everything's always going to go well. We had a project that ended up being my very favorite project, and it was we were studying cultures. So we started off with an exploration of, I want to say Haiti may have been the first place because we read a science article that was derived from something happening in Haiti, and that went really well. And that was their opportunity to practice all the tools that I wanted them to be able to use for the next
right?
aspect of the project. Well, the next week we were studying Afghanistan, and the goal of the project was for them to write a narrative script as if they were a child in Afghanistan, and then they could record the narration on iMovie and on their iPads, and then pull pictures from Discovery Ed or iCurio, which are two aggregation sites, I guess. Like, what would you call them? Exploring sites,
Right,
search engines.
right.
So students say search engines. They would pull pictures from there to use in their videos, and it the outcome was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the students were so enthralled in what they were doing, and the variety of the experiences, the outcomes was extraordinary. Some of them focused on the food that Afghanistan has, and growing it, and the work that it takes on the kids' part in order to create that food. Some of them focused on the fashion. Some of them focused on the warfare. Some of them focused on the religion, and then a lot of them did a blend of those four topics. Although I didn't have to suggest any of those topics because we had been studying cultures for a while. At that point, they already knew what made up cultures. Well, one of my students' fathers served in Afghanistan, and he felt really uncomfortable with the idea that his child was learning the culture of Afghanistan. He wanted to keep his child sheltered from that experience, from that knowledge, which I think is not something that I obviously don't agree with because I created the project, but I do have to respect the wishes of the parents in my classroom. So he did an alternate science project that really was great for our whole class. But while he was doing that, the rest of the kids were engaging in this Afghanistan project, and it was my most proud. I mean, the questions and the critiques and the emotion that went into those projects was astounding. And we showed it at parent, like it was an awards for the parents who volunteered the most or whatnot. There was probably 50 parents there, and some of them, I mean, it just got a huge applause, and some of the parents were just in awe, like they were really just stricken by the complexity that these movies had. I mean, by 8 and 9 year olds, it just blew my mind. So
Third
the
graders.
with project based learning, never. I mean, you're going to get more than you expect. So never limit your students by giving them exactly what you want them to do. Create an opportunity for them to go beyond what you want them to do, and they will.
And one of the things that interests me is that you've done a lot of reading of blog posts by EDM 310 students. You've done a lot of evaluating, not for grades because lab assistants are supposed to give grades, but you still evaluate what they've done as projects. How would you compare the products of these third graders with juniors in college in terms of the quality of their thinking, the way in which they are able to analyze particular problems, the way in which they are able to communicate?
If you are holding the projects next to each other, I think that my best are similar to your best, and I think that my worst are similar to your worst. But the difference is my products are being made by 8 and 9 year olds, and yours are being made by adults. So,
Thank you,
but
Anthony. Okay, one of the things that we want to really stress is that project based learning involves not just a method for you to evaluate students, but also a very powerful method by which students learn. But it takes a lot of planning and a lot of work and a lot of fancy footwork at sometimes as you go through the whole project to make it successful. And even if it's not successful in terms of every project being perfect. It is successful to the extent that people have learned, and I think that's the important thing for us to take away from this. Now, you mentioned a really positive reaction from the parents in this show at night. What about from the students? What kind of reactions do you get from the students? And I'm going to ask you the same thing about administrators too, your principal and other people.
My students love the projects that we do most of the time. And when they don't love it, it's because collaboration is a hard thing for people, whenever you rely on someone. So,
No kidding. Wow.
and that's exactly it. So the kids, I mean, I've overheard them talking about it. I've whipped out my phone and said, "Hey, can you say that one more time?" Or "Can you stop right there and let me record the rest of your conversation?" Because I'll be working in small groups with someone, and then I'll overhear them discussing why they like one project more than the other project, and it gives me valuable feedback so I can develop the next projects according to their tastes, because we're adults and we forget what kids like. But they love it because my kids aren't trapped in worksheets, and whenever I do give them a worksheet, they know it's meaningful. So they know that that worksheet is to help gauge where they are and allow me to design a product or a project that is more appropriate for their needs. So I think my students appreciate the fact that almost everything that we do in the classroom is meaningful, and that's what project-based learning provides for teachers and for students and for hopefully the community that you're serving.
What
So,
about the administrators, your principal, the superintendent, if he knows about what's happening in your classroom, the people in Montgomery, what kind of reactions do they have?
so all of those bosses that you just named, they have high approval ratings. So they've definitely let me take the reins because they know that when students are engaged, they're learning. So um, so we're developing. Let's see. This is one of the projects that we had one week that would kind of answer this question. So Julie sends people into my classroom.
Julie is your
Often.
principal.
That's right, and she's wonderful. She gives us a lot of freedom as long as we can defend why we're doing something. She pretty much lets us do it, and she sends people into our classrooms a lot to see what we're doing because she really believes in the practice that we're doing. And one time she invited we're a premier school, and she had Dr. Lee and people from ARI and Alex and all over the state come into our classrooms. So there were like three groves of people coming in from various places throughout the southeast, and my students had been working on. They'd read a story, and they had to write a sequence chart of it. So the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth thing that happened in the story, and then later in the week they had to decide what three scenes were the most important to the story. So would the story still be able to survive if it only had those three scenes? And then finally, at the end of the week, they had to choose one scene that had the biggest effect on the story's outcome. So which scene was most critical to the story? And they got their reward was they got to write a comic strip online about. They got to use a online comic strip creator to recreate those scenes and use dialogue, because that was the grammar that we were studying that week, and or the writing skills we were studying that week. Well, it worked, but then a lot of the saving wasn't happening and the printing wasn't happening, and it kind of became a nightmare really quickly. And this is on the day that all these people were coming into the room, so I had to improvise. And I had a really great professor, Dr. Vituli, who taught us a lot about how to use art in the classroom. So their reward became getting to paint their favorite scene, or the scene that they thought was had the biggest effect. But they weren't allowed to paint that scene until they had written a defense of that choice. So they had to argue why was it the most important scene. And it isn't just a sentence saying this is the most important scene because this. It's a whole essay. They had written out a whole page worth of defense, and I would hold it up and say, this is what makes this defense really great, and this is where she could, and how could she improve this. or what do you think about this to their classmates, so they have an idea of where to go. And all of them had chosen so many different scenes that it was okay that we were sharing ideas. They didn't end up copying each other because they had all chosen so many different scenes as the most important scene, because they had so many different reasons. So student choice is another big aspect in project-based learning that I forgot to mention, that when you give students the opportunity to choose, then you also give them more ownership and more pride, and they can really understand what they're saying and arguing at that point. So they had written these defenses, and then they were in the process of painting. So they had these watercolors, 30 kids spread out all over my floor with watercolors, and I'm sitting there reviewing their defenses and saying, yep, you can go, yep, you can go. So half of them are still writing feverishly, and half of them are on the floor painting. And then I have 12 adults come in the room. And they said, we want to talk to you about project-based learning. And I said, oh my, I'm kind of, up to my ears in project-based learning right now. Why don't you ask one of the kids? And I asked my kids.
Oh, great.
All the hands shot up in the air. So.
Oh, everybody wanted it.
So on the kids aspect, they're really proud of what they want to do. They know what they're doing, and they know why they're doing it. That's what project-based learning allows for. And so whenever strangers walk into the room, which happens often, they are happy to share what they're doing. So I think that's telling of the students' satisfaction. And then as a result of that, they invited me to Montgomery to help revise a project-based learning template, and talk about how we're going to be creating project-based learning templates to inspire teachers across the state to start doing project-based learning. So we're trying to develop a shared vision for the state. And then Dr. Lee was the one that gave that approval for me to go do that with Alex and ARI and all these other state departments. So I got to represent elementary teachers. I was the one representing the elementary teachers. There was someone who represented middle school teachers and someone who represented high school teachers. And the rest of the people there were hand chosen to represent different state departments. So working with people who are so far away from the classroom, but still involved in education for this at the state level was really incredible. So I can see where they're trying to drive us. But,
okay, well, this has been really fun talking about project-based learning. You know that I've been involved in it. I haven't done anything but project-based learning in it for 45 years now. That's just exactly. I started in 1968, and I think that it's important to think. The thing I go back to is this student 2 or 3 years ago, whom you know, and who came to me one day and said, "Dr. Strange, I just want you to teach me so I don't have to learn." And that really sums up what project-based learning is and how it differs from traditional one. You are a learner, and you engage in that process of learning, and you don't just memorize and burp it back. And so it's fun, it's hard work, but the rewards are absolutely fantastic, as you can tell from hearing the stories that Anthony had to tell, and his parents' reactions, and the kids' reactions, and the administrators' reactions, and my reaction. I think it's just absolutely fabulous. But I'm biased, I must say. Okay, thanks very much, Anthony, and we'll be back in another of these continuing sagas of interviewing Anthony as we learn in EDM 310.